As we reported for the past 15 months, well, President Trump's approval rating has really never cleared 40% for any extended period of time. That means 6 in 10 of us don't like his decisions, actions, his style, or just don't like him. But there's no need to count the ways he worries one local author. Now, she has put them all in the list. It's a catalog of what the author says are all the wrongs the current occupant of the White House has done unto the Republic. Now, the book's author, Amy Siskind, and she recently sat down with me to discuss the book as well as the president. You literally, I've talked to people seemingly on a daily basis that talk about stress from this presidency, but you literally cracked a tooth over it and had to wear a mouth guard. That's the first time I've heard that.
Yeah, well, I've been at this since November 2016 without a day looking away, and the news has only escalated significantly, and so we're living in chaos, and I'm struggling to keep up, and you know, life before I started keeping this list as it was.
Well, give me the genesis of it. Was this just therapeutic, that you had to put down on paper things that you were seeing that were just out of the norm here or worse? How did it morph into what it's become?
Well, there was no grand vision when I started. I had just read about authoritarian regimes, and I'm a Jewish American, so I had some background and knowledge about Hitler and his uprising. And things concerned me as he was taking office, the number of hate crimes, how he was fueling hatred and acts against others, that he had no real political vision or agenda the way a typical Republican or Democrat would. And so the advice that I took away from reading about authoritarianism is we would be as if we were the frog in water coming to boil degree by degree and not notice that things were subtly changing around us. So week 1 was 9 items. Now we're up to over 160. And the things that are happening every week. This is not normal things. And these aren't Republican versus Democrat. Right. These are things that are not normal to our democracy, or rights being taken away from marginalized communities, or things happening to our environment. And so what the list does is when a new item comes up, like Michael Cohen's home gets raided, you can look in the table of contents and see, wow, there's 5 other things related to Michael Cohen and Russia and his trip to Prague. And all these things sort of tie back together.
And I'll tell you, as a person who does this on the air for an hour every night, I thought I not only knew but remembered them all. But when I was going through this and the volume of it, and yes, there's some opinion in this, and there's some context from people, both historians as also legal experts, but for the most part, this is a documentation of what's happened since, as you said, 2 days after he took office, we learned about the expression of alternative facts. But the volume of what went on, and I think as important as maybe what he has said, it's also what's been done. Talk about some of the small and large ways, whether it be through deregulation here or changes in terms of how we police certain things or not, that's as much, if not a bigger story than some of the overarching scandals and investigations.
Right. So every week it's the shiny coins, and no fault to anyone in the media, but the media spends 80% of the time covering 20 to 30% of the items in this list. And there'll be important items where I'm screaming in my head, like the Department of Homeland Security is starting to maintain a list of journalists. That's reminiscent of Hitler, reminiscent of Nixon. Wasn't at all reported in the national news, happened on a quiet Friday. The other kind of things I try to capture that get very little national attention are rights and protections being taken away from marginalized communities, people with disabilities, women, things that are being rolled back that are decades old, like the Civil Rights Act, 1964, Sessions trying to roll back protections for sexual orientation, or the things being done to our environment, the biggest land grab in Utah. And what will happen over time, take for example, tax days this week. And remember how outraged everyone was last year that Trump didn't make his returns public. And now it's gone from screaming to this dull whimper because there's 20 other things this week we're concerned about.
Let me ask you that question, because I find myself in that spot where you're damned if you and damned if you don't. If you decide to stop following the shiny coin as media and to stop talking, for example, about the tweet he sent out last night that the allegation of Stormy Daniels that some guy threatened her and her child, well, that's not true. Well, how possibly could he know it's not true? And why would he get involved in an ongoing case that everybody has told him, do yourself no harm and stop talking? by covering that, we're not talking about some of the tax implications, the skyrocketing deficits and national debt that'll be as a consequence and all the rest of it. But if you don't do that, we now abet maybe his behavior. If we do that, that subscribes from the time that you should talk about material objects. You've taken a 10,000-foot view for the past year. What's your recommendation?
Well, I think the media's right. I think you're doing the best you can, and I think everybody in the media reads my list and realizes all the stories that maybe we're just getting local coverage or we're getting very little coverage. And as much of a struggle as it is for me each day to read his Twitter feed, believe me, I take no joy in reading about cheating Obama and Wild Bill. I mean, can you imagine a president attacking past presidents? And it's Tuesday, you know, and there's 5 more of those things, and he's attacking Comey. But it's important for me to write those down, and to not normalize it. I go through that conversation with myself every week, the importance of writing down what he's doing. And this is the first draft of history.
We have a joke. We have an editorial meeting every day at 10 o'clock, and then by 4, we've got to throw it out because something has happened. I swear, Fridays at 4 o'clock,
yes,
where it's usually little, if anything's going on, that's when some of the craziest stuff happens. But
yes,
Amy, to that point, you have detected some clear patterns in the last year plus. What are they?
Well, he cares about 2 things: enriching himself and staying in power. And the executive branch, of which he is the head of, is largely unstaffed. Half of our key roles in the executive branch are unfilled, and a third don't even have nominees. Yes. We're at the point now where basically it feels like Trump Organization, our government. There's one person unilaterally making all the decisions, and he wavers week by week on tariffs, on Syria, depending on his mood. And anybody who disagrees with him is shown the door. McMaster, Cohn, he surrounded himself by sycophants and people that look good on TV. But the thing that I learned in high school history that we all learned about, these checks and balances, I think we've come to learn from this experience that those were norms, not laws. Because the Republican Party has the power, for example, to put into place a law that would block him from firing Mueller, but they refuse to. Over 40 Republicans in the House are not running for re-election, starting in the early weeks of that book with Chaffetz not running, and then Gowdy and Darrell Issa, and most recently Paul Ryan. These are very powerful people in their party with big positions, and instead of standing up and putting country first, they're running for the hills, not wanting to be associated with the taint. I do believe there are headwinds that between the Me Too movement, what's happening with Cohen being raided, with the Mueller investigation, and with Cambridge Analytica, which is heavily covered in this book, all the anomalies in our election that, again, have gotten almost no media coverage, that one of these things is going to come to roost.
Well, again, the book is the list here, and if you want to be reminded, maybe of some stuff you don't want to be reminded of, but nonetheless, just see how much has happened over a year's time here. I suggest you check it out. And again, Amy, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, keeping that interview in mind as we pivot back to the midterms, I want to remind you again of 2 numbers I showed you just last segment here. Trump's decisions are a distant 5th on the list of issues that voters say they care about in the midterms. I happen to think it's a lot higher than that. And more Americans say in this poll that they view impeachment of the president as a reason to vote against a candidate, not a reason to vote for the candidate. All right, Andrew, impeachment and Democrats, stay away from it like the plague?
Ask me the question as though I'm a candidate.
Would you like to see the president impeached?
I don't want to see any president impeached, Rich. I didn't want to see Bill Clinton impeached. I don't want to see Donald Trump impeached. I want oversight of this president. I want oversight of Scott Pruitt to make sure he's not spending your money wastefully and that he's actually doing the job of the EPA, that the federal government keeps Russia in check so they don't interfere with our elections. And yeah, when the information comes back from the Mueller probe, we'll review it and do the proper oversight and figure out what that means later. It's about oversight, not impeachment.
I'm telling you, if you're an impartial person, and I went through this book here for that, your jaw drops at some of the things that were said or done. It's not an opinion book. It's all documentation of what happens and how unnormal, if that's a word here, this last year and a half has been. That's got to be part of this midterms, right?
I think it does,
People
and
want a little normalcy.
I think to the question you asked, Andrew, I think it depends on whether you're talking about the primary or the general election. in the primary in a real blue district, a Democrat can be killed if they don't say we should impeach the president right away. But as you get into that general election, your answer may shift a little bit. So that's what I think we're going to see with Democrats. You know, they do have to offer something positive, but when you come out to get out the vote, particularly in those primaries, it's going to be an anti-Trump that gets you out to vote. I mean, that's very clear historically.
Just got to keep it in check, though, because
you
the
have
one
to,
the
as
one
you
thing,
move into the general.
But the one thing that Democrats can do to really shoot themselves in the foot is aim too far to the left on the issues, too far in terms of putting a check on President Trump. I know it's what their base wants to hear, but the base has to just nod and go along with it and be like, oh, you know, would you rather have them?
But it's the base that's going to get out in a midterm primary in particular, and to a lesser extent in the general, and that's who they're playing to.
And I'm telling you, guys, if you're just a check, I know you say, I hear it every night, Rich, but trust me, when you look at it in black and white here, and you look at that book here, it will make your jaw drop. I'm not kidding. Jeannie, Andrew, great job, guys. Thank you very much. Coming up next, there's still a lot of palpable anger, not at the president this time, but at Con Ed and other power companies over last month's storms. Now, you can vent your frustrations as well. We're going to show you how.